At our Thanksgiving gathering, my mother lifted her wine glass and announced, "Here's to the one child who truly brought us pride." All eyes turned to my sister, followed by a round of applause. My place at the table wasn't even set. I rose, took a steadying breath, and said, "Thank you for finally putting it into words." I headed for the door, but froze when I overheard my father's panicked whisper. At 32, I'd always known my place in the family, but hearing it voiced aloud during Thanksgiving dinner hit me like a betrayal from those I trusted most. The sting wasn't just in the words. It was the way everyone nodded, as if they'd been waiting for someone to say it. I'd driven 3 hours to be there, as I had every year since college. Each time, I walked into that house hoping for a change. The aroma of roasted turkey and stuffing should have felt comforting, but it only reminded me of holidays where I was relegated to the kids' table long after I'd outgrown it. Christmases where my sister's gifts towered over mine. Birthdays where my presence felt like an afterthought. My sister had arrived the day before with her husband and 2 children. She'd been the family's pride since birth, valedictorian, Ivy League scholar, married to a doctor, mother to the grandchildren my parents adored. I was the unexpected child, born 5 years later, the one who scraped through community college, worked in IT instead of pursuing a prestigious career, and remained single at 32, apparently unworthy of affection. As I entered the dining room, I noticed something off. The table was set for 8, but there were 9 of us that I counted again. My parents, my sister's family of 4, my uncle who always came solo, and me. 9 people, 8 seats. When I asked my mom where I should sit, trying to sound casual, she hesitated before suggesting I grab a chair from the kitchen and find a spot. My sister was already in my usual place, holding her youngest while her husband carved the turkey like he ran the show. The kitchen chair I dragged over was mismatched, unsteady, and lower than the others, making me feel like a kid again, pleading to join the grown-ups. I wedged myself between my uncle and the wall, my knees knocking against the table leg with every shift. Dinner conversation swirled around me like I was invisible. My sister shared news of her law firm promotion. Her husband discussed his latest medical journal article, and my parents soaked up every word. When my uncle asked about my life, I mentioned my recent promotion to team lead for our company's top client, a goal I'd worked toward for 2 years. My dad gave a vague nod before redirecting the talk to my sister's latest courtroom victory. Mom gushed about how proud they were, how they always knew she was destined for greatness. I sat there, poking at my stuffing, wondering why I kept returning. The turning point came during dessert. Mom stood, glass in hand, her face rosy from the wine they'd been drinking. She cleared her throat and said she wanted to make a toast. My sister looked flattered but surprised, probably thinking it was a sweet gesture. Then Mom raised her glass and said she was toasting the only child who'd truly made them proud, her gaze fixed on my sister with unmistakable warmth. The room broke into cheers. My uncle clapped heartily, my brother-in-law raised his glass with a proud grin, and even the kids joined in, mimicking the adults. My sister blushed, saying it wasn't necessary, but she basked in the spotlight. I sat with my hands folded, feeling like I'd been erased. Not just overlooked, erased entirely. The missing place setting suddenly made sense. I was the error they'd been trying to erase for 32 years. Something shifted inside me, not rage, but a piercing clarity. I stood slowly, every eye on me for the first time that night. The applause faded as they waited. In a calm, almost casual tone, I thanked Mom for finally voicing what we'd all known for years. The truth was liberating, I said, compared to pretending we were a happy, united family. The silence that followed was heavy. My sister's face paled, and she started to say Mom didn't mean it like that. I gently interrupted, telling her she didn't need to defend it. We all understood Mom's meaning. I grabbed my coat from the closet and headed for the door, ready to stop subjecting myself to their dismissal and rejection. But my dad's voice stopped me in my tracks. He wasn't talking to me. He was whispering urgently to Mom in the dining room, but his words carried. He asked if she remembered what I'd mentioned last Christmas about my work's life insurance policy, where I'd named them as beneficiaries. My blood turned to ice. Last December, I'd casually mentioned that my company's life insurance payout had increased, and since I had no spouse or kids, I kept my parents as beneficiaries. It felt like the right thing to do. Dad had asked detailed questions about the amount, the policies, and whether it was tied to my job. Now I understood his curiosity and why they kept inviting me despite their obvious indifference. Mom hushed him, but it was too late. My sister asked what they were talking about, and my uncle looked puzzled. The kids grew restless, sensing the tension but not grasping it. I stepped back into the dining room and asked Dad point-blank what he was so worried about. The question lingered like a storm cloud. He mumbled something about just wanting to ensure I was okay, suggesting we'd all had too much wine and should talk later. I pressed further, asking if he was worried about losing the life insurance money if I changed the beneficiaries. The glance he exchanged with Mom confirmed everything. My sister stared at them, dawning horror on her face as she began to piece it together. My uncle set down his glass, watching the drama unfold like a spectator at a play. I said I had a lot to think about, starting with the life insurance. There was also the loan I'd given them 3 years ago for their mortgage refinance, which they'd never mentioned repaying, and the down payment I'd chipped in for their new car last year, framed as a family gesture that only flowed one way. Dad tried to backpedal, insisting I'd misunderstood. Mom claimed her toast was a mistake, that she was proud of both her kids. But her words rang empty, like a rehearsed apology. I asked them one question. If I hadn't mentioned the life insurance, would I have been invited to Thanksgiving? The silence was its own answer. My sister spoke up, asking our parents if this was why they'd kept me around. She looked shaken, as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Her husband stared at his plate, visibly uncomfortable. Then it hit me. My sister hadn't known. I'd always assumed she was complicit in their favoritism, but her shock was genuine. She'd believed our parents loved us equally, that my treatment was just coincidence or my imagination. I apologized to her for how she was finding out. She deserved to hold on to the version of our parents she'd grown up with, but I couldn't keep pretending. Mom started sobbing, begging me not to leave upset. She swore she loved me, that I mattered to the family. When I asked her to name one thing she was proud of about me, one achievement, one trait, one moment, she drew a blank. Dad took a different tack, getting angry and accusing me of being overly sensitive and dramatic. He said I was ruining Thanksgiving over a misunderstanding, that I should be thankful for all they'd done for me. When I asked him to name one thing they'd done for me that they hadn't done twice over for my sister, he listed basics like food and shelter, as if those were grand gestures. The absurdity of it all sank in. I was a grown man, arguing with my parents about whether they valued me, while my sister's kids watched from their high chairs. This was what I'd endured for years, chasing crumbs of affection from people who saw me as a burden and a contingency plan. I looked at my sister and said I hoped she'd love both her kids equally, even if one turned out differently than she expected. Tears in her eyes, she nodded. Then I walked out for good. Update 1. The calls began the next morning. Mom, then Dad, then my sister. I let them go to voicemail, needing space to process. When I listened, the messages followed a pattern. Mom's was tearful, apologizing and pleading for me to return so we could talk. Dad's was defensive, saying I'd blown things out of proportion and demanding I call back to resolve it. My sister stood out. She sounded heartbroken and said we needed to talk about our family. I called her back first. She picked up quickly and apologized for not seeing how I'd been treated. She'd spent the night reflecting on past holidays and dinners, realizing she couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. She told me her husband had mentioned he'd always wondered why our parents seemed more invested in their family than in me. He'd chalked it up to me being single, but now he suspected more. I told her this wasn't her fault. She'd been a kid when this started, not responsible for noticing or fixing it. The issue was with our parents. She surprised me by asking for specific examples of their favoritism, things she might have overlooked. So I shared. I told her about the time in high school when I made the honor roll, and Mom asked if it was a mistake. About how they attended every one of her soccer games, but skipped my community college graduation for a dinner party. About how they helped her buy her first house, but told me to be financially responsible when I needed help with a car loan. The more I said, the quieter she got. She admitted she remembered some of those moments, but had rationalized them, thinking they were tougher on me because I was the boy, the younger one, or because they expected more from me. She'd never considered they simply cared less. She asked about the life insurance. I said I wasn't sure yet. Part of me wanted to change the beneficiaries to prove a point, but I didn't want to act out of anger. By the end of the call, she was crying, saying she felt awful for basking in their favoritism without questioning my treatment. I told her it wasn't her fault. She'd been a kid receiving love, as she should have. The problem was our parents only had enough for one of us. Update 2. Dad showed up at my apartment the following Tuesday, unannounced. He looked older, more worn than I remembered. He asked to talk, and despite everything, I let him in. He went straight to the life insurance, revealing his priorities. He asked if I was changing the beneficiaries, and when I said I was considering it, he grew agitated. He said they'd been counting on that money for retirement, that it had shaped their financial plans. I asked him to hear himself, worried about losing money from my death, not about losing me while I was alive. He tried to pivot, saying he cared about our relationship, but the life insurance talk had shown him the family's tensions. He wanted to fix things, he claimed. I asked him to name one thing he was proud of about me. After a long pause, he mentioned my steady job and how I'd stayed out of trouble, faint praise at best. Then I asked why he thought I'd named them beneficiaries. He said he assumed family mattered to me. I told him he was right. It had mattered to me for 32 years. That's why it took so long to accept it wasn't mutual. He insisted they loved me as much as my sister, but when I asked why their love looked so different for us, he had no answer. He said they treated us differently because we had different needs. I said different treatment was fine, but unequal care and respect weren't. I pointed out that he never asked about my promotion, but knew every detail of my sister's cases. He'd never visited my apartment until now, but helped paint her house last summer. We talked in circles for an hour, him apologizing, then defending, never fully admitting the problem or convincing me things would change. I told him I needed space to decide what kind of relationship we'd have, if any. He asked about the life insurance again before leaving. I said I'd make the choice that felt right, not what was convenient for them. His expression showed that wasn't the answer he wanted. Update 3. 3 weeks later, I made my choice. I changed the life insurance beneficiaries to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, a way to honor the person I'd become despite my family, not because of them. I didn't tell them right away. Instead, I focused on what I wanted my life to be. I realized I'd been holding back, making choices to please my parents instead of pursuing my own happiness. I started dating a woman from work I'd liked for months, but hadn't pursued, feeling unworthy. I enrolled in a coding boot camp I'd been eyeing for years, ready to shift careers. I began therapy to process the family baggage. My sister and I met for dinner before Christmas. She'd been calling regularly, trying to build a more honest relationship. She said she'd been confronting our parents about their treatment of us. They were mostly in denial, but there were cracks. Mom admitted she found it easier to connect with my sister, and Dad said they'd always had higher expectations for her. They weren't ready to admit fault, but they were starting to see my pain. She asked if I'd join them for Christmas, promising a proper seat and a civil conversation. I thanked her, but said I wasn't ready. I was still discovering who I was without their disapproval. Instead, I spent Christmas with my girlfriend's family. They welcomed me, asked about my life, and treated me like someone worth knowing. It was my best holiday in years. On New Year's Eve, I called my parents. I told them I'd changed the life insurance beneficiaries and wouldn't attend family events for the foreseeable future. Mom cried, Dad got angry, but I stayed calm. I said if they ever wanted a real relationship with me, not my money or obligation, but me, they knew where to find me. I also urged them to see my sister as a person, not just a symbol of their success. She deserved parents who loved her for who she was, not her achievements. The call was brief. There wasn't much left to say. 6 months later, I'm doing better than ever. My career is thriving, my relationship is strong, and I've built a chosen family of friends who value me. My sister and I talk often, and she's setting boundaries with our parents too. Sometimes I wonder if I'll regret cutting them off so fully. But then I remember that Thanksgiving, sitting in a wobbly chair while they toasted their only worthy child, and I know I made the right call. Some families are worth fighting for. Others, you're better off leaving behind.